All right, folks, in this video, I'm going to give you a really quick run through on how to create a clock hand and then use a Revolute joint to be able to adjust it so that it rotates around the shaft on the mechanism. So to do this, I'll quickly create a sketch on top of the shaft. And so there's the shaft, and I'll right-click on that, and I'll say Create Sketch. From here, I'm going to draw in some lines, and I'm going to tie those in to the clock shaft, and I'm going to pull it up so that it's not too high, and then I'll pull over another one, and you'll see that I'm making a ridiculous clock hand here. And the reason that I'm doing it in this exaggerated way is to show you that you don't really want to nail down your lines by drawing them. You want to nail them down with dimensions and with constraints. So I'm going to do that right now. The first thing I'm going to do is dimension in the distance of this edge from the origin point, and I'll set that to, hang on a sec, okay, hit D for dimension, click, and then click the origin point, and I want that to be about 3. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side of the clock hand, and just dimension that from the origin point at 3 millimeters as well. So now I've got a couple of constrained lines here, and now I'm going to dimension this line down here. I'm actually not going to dimension that one. Because this line should coincide with the origin point, I'm going to use a constraint, the coincident constraint. So I go up here, and in my sketch environment, I can bring up the coincident constraint. It's also available under the constraints menu. But I'll bring up coincident, and I'm going to say I want this line to coincide with that origin point, and you'll see it immediately turns black. Fusion now knows that that line should always, well, line up, I guess, with the origin point. The last edge that isn't constrained yet is this top one, so I'll hit D on my keyboard so that I can dimension how far it is from, again, that known geometry of the origin point. So I'll click in there, get my origin point, and I can actually type in a value, and I'll want that to be 120 millimeters. And just to make sure it's all copacetic, I'll go in and take a look. Yep, that's not going to touch my little hour markers. That's great. I'm going to add some round ends to my clock hands just to make it pretty, and also to make it easier for me to create a revolute joint, or a revolving joint, so that the clock hand can rotate around. So I'm going to put in my center circle around the origin, and I'll just snap that out to the edge of my clock hands, or the edges there, and that turns black. Yay! And now I'm going to pull down, and I'll do the same thing on the top, just, because I'm a completionist and I can't help it. Snap into the midpoint and pull it out, and it turns black as well. Kippy-IA, it is beautiful. All right, I'm going to now want to extrude that. I'll finish my sketch, and of course, because I'm going to use best practice, I'll toggle down my sketches, and I'll call that the minute hand sketch. There it is, and it's all selected. In fact, everything's selected in that sketch because I clicked on it. And if I hit extrude now, it will. Well, no, I guess it didn't select. I'll have to go back and click all the different bits that I want to extrude. I want that and that and that, and I want to get those bits as well. Okay, and then I'm going to pull that down, or I guess I could pull it up. I'll pull it up by 1 millimeter. This is really just a visual thing. I don't necessarily need it to be glued on or attached somehow to the shaft of the mechanism. I just want to be able to move the clock hand around so that I can get screenshots showing the clock telling different times. Okay, so I pulled up my clock hand by 1 millimeter. We can see it there. The operation's wrong, though. I do not want to join that to the shaft because that would fuse it onto it. That's not what I want. I want to make a new component. So I'll make a new component and say OK. And then down in my data tree over here, I've got a fresh component. Of course, I'll follow best practice, and I'll call that the hour. Sorry, that's the minute hand. Okay, here we go. Minute hand. Done. Okay, so we now have a. I'll go back to the home view. We can see that we've got a minute hand on top of our clock. It's kind of ugly, but that's okay. Just for the purposes of telling time, that's fine for reading the clock. And you can see it's pointing straight up at the 12-hour marker. So now what we need to do is make it so that we can move this thing around. So I shall introduce you to Revolute Joints. In order to join the clock hand, the minute hand, to the shaft, I'm going to need to use a joint. Under the Assemble menu, I will bring up the joint command. And the first thing the joint command wants to know is, okay, what am I joining? So the first component is the minute hand. And so to get sort of good visibility of that, I'm going to turn off a bunch of things. I'm going to turn off the mechanism and the clock face and the retaining rings. I'm going to turn off everything. And then I'm going to rotate underneath this part. And you can see that there's a little X that shows up. And that's that circle that I drew around the clock shaft when I was creating the minute hand. So if I click there, you can see that little circle-shaped thing. That's a marker showing you that's where the joint is going to originate. So I'll click there, and now that's where the joint will start. And I now need to create the second joint, which is in there in the dialog. And to do that, I will turn the mechanism visibility back on, and I can just go in there and I can go to the very dead center of the shaft and click there, and then it's created a joint. You can see it's actually trying to revolute. It's trying to rotate around, which is cool. I can adjust the motion in here, and I will do that in a moment. But for now, I'm happy. I've got a revolute joint. Make sure you've selected that it's a revolute joint. That will be a rotating joint that you can adjust, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. There we go. Don't choose the other ones because they all do different things. But for this one, we want the revolute joint. All right, done. All right, so now how do we adjust the angle or the rotation of that revolute joint? Once you create a joint, you'll now have a folder of joints in your data tree. I'll twirl that down, and you can see that there's my revolute joint. That's that one there. And as soon as I click on it, it highlighted this little flag there, and that's the actual revolute joint itself. If I click on the Edit Joint Limits button there, the orange button with the arrow on it, I'll click that, and now I can set a minimum distance, and I can grab that arrow and I can rotate it around. So I'll set that at, it doesn't really matter, but I'll set it at -90, that's fine. I'll turn on my clock face, and I'll even turn on the hour markers so that we can see where that ends up. And you can see that, what it's doing. You can kind of see from the top view where it's at. And I can just move that around. But I'll set it at -90 for now, so that I can bring it over to the 15-minute mark. And I've set my minimum distance. Hang on a sec. Wait. You need to set minimum and a rest and a maximum. So there we go. Let's bring it over. Bring them all over. There we go. Okay. Hang on a second here. Oh. Okay, if it's giving you grief, just copy and paste in the values. If you set them all to the same thing, it'll leave the clock hand there. There we go. So that's how you can basically adjust the joint, and you could always move it around, right? And you can see how the maximum movement is adjusting as I move it around. You can change these values, the minimum, the maximum, and the resting position of the joint. I encourage you to play with this. You'll see how it works once you play with it, I think, is the best advice I can give you at this point. But in any case, I've set I'll set my clock time to a time that I want. There we go. And I'll get that at -90. Say, okay, wait, no, it needs them all three to be the same. So again, I'll just copy and paste those in. There we go. Okay, so now at this point, I've got my, a clock minute hand set. I would do the same thing for the hour. Go to the top view, zoom in a little bit so you can see the whole thing. And now, under File, I can actually go into the File menu and say Capture Image. And this will allow me to capture an image. I'm going to set it to transparent background. And now I can actually select the size of the capture I want. So for evidence capture for doing a test, I could go for something like that. And then I can say save to my computer. I will throw that on my desktop so I can find it later. And it's called Clock Demo Home Learning V12. And then I say save. If I go back to my Finder, and under my desktop, there will be a PNG file, and there it is, clock demo home learning v12.png. This has got a transparent background. You can just drag and drop that into your work or into some sort of a test thing where you show your clock design with some hands on it to some users and say, well, can you tell the time or not? Okay, I know that was a long video, but it does show